Hi, and welcome to Healthy Dose. I'm Shreya Srivastav, your host for this episode. I am a research fellow at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy. Healthy Dose is a podcast on health law and policy. Season 1 of our podcast tracks the journey of a vaccine from the lab to the people in the context of the COVID 19 pandemic. For the first episode of our podcast series, Healthy Dose, we had a conversation with Dr. Nilima Kshirsagar, former chair, clinical pharmacology at the Indian Council of Medical Research, New Delhi, and with Dr. Dhwani Mehta, lead health and co-founder of Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, to discuss how scientists and regulators respond to the need of developing a safe and effective vaccine in the face of a raging global pandemic.
So if you ask me how's the life, yeah, well, uh, there is a lot of, it's like pleasures and pangs, as we may call it. So the pleasure is that you feel happy that you're in some way serving the society and in some way helping the patients by bringing in things which are useful for uh, taking care of their diseases, helping them to control, eliminate diseases. It's also like never a dull day because in a scientist's life, something new is always happening. And now in COVID time, it is happening every second. The pace of science and work has outstripped any imaginable work in the past. But it's always been, very big challenge and also very interesting work. But what are the pangs? The pangs are sometimes, it's not always that a new drug that you're working on succeeds. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you expect it to do something, but it doesn't do that. And then you have to go back to the drawing board, as we say, and see what went wrong. Why did it not work?
This was Dr. Nilima Kshirsagar speaking about the pleasures and pangs of a pharmaceutical scientist's life. Have you ever participated in a lemon and spoon race? If you run fast, you drop the lemon. If you are slow, you lose the race. It is all about maintaining that perfect balance between speed and safety while reaching the finish line, all while maintaining your own footing. You must be wondering, why am I speaking about a lemon and spoon race in a podcast on vaccine development? Indian scientists and regulatory authorities have confronted a similar challenge. While scientists have been dealing with the challenge of creating a safe and effective vaccine against COVID 19 in record time, regulatory authorities have been devising speedy ways to test and approve these vaccines. The challenge has been to essentially balance speed with safety, like it is in a lemon and spoon race. In India, the breakthrough appears to have arrived with the approval of two vaccines, Covishield and Covaxin. Recently, through interim data from phase 3 trials, Covaxin is reported to have 81% efficacy. But what does this number mean? What should laypersons understand by the safety and efficacy of a vaccine? How have scientists and regulators balanced these two aspects alongside the need for swift development of a vaccine under the onslaught of a global pandemic? Let's begin at the starting line. When does the starter gun go off in this lemon and spoon race? When do scientists, pharma companies, and nations start thinking about making a vaccine? We spoke to Dr. Kshirsagar about this.
We're talking about preventing a disease from happening. When we talk about vaccine, it's like preventing something. Most of the vaccines are like that. There are a few which are for treatment, but most vaccines are for preventing a disease. So when we talk of therefore preventing a disease, we have to consider what is the chance of getting that disease. So what is the risk of getting the disease, and then what happens when you get the disease? We all get common cold every now and then. So there is a risk of getting something as simple as common cold, and we try to do something to avoid it. But there are some diseases which are also simple. They can kill you. You can die of the disease. So clearly the risk of the disease is huge. So when you have something to prevent that, you can probably take a bit bigger risk. So it's like, you can't use a knife to kill a fly. So, what are you using to prevent what disease? Is what decides the risk and the benefit, as you said.
Dr. Sheersagar earlier spoke about the risks and benefits associated with a vaccine. The two terms that have become synonymous with risks and benefit over the last year are safety and efficacy. One could say that vaccination was in fact developed as a safer alternative to variolation. Variolation was a process where fluid from an infected area of a smallpox patient would be transferred to a healthy individual with the hope of gaining a much milder infection and immunity from a major lethal smallpox infection. Today, safety and efficacy of a vaccine are tested through the first three phases of clinical trials. How should non scientists make sense of these terms in their modern context? Here's what Dr. Sheersagar had to say.
Lot of basic science goes into developing a vaccine. We learn from past experiences, starting from maybe Edward Jenner, who got his smallpox vaccine somewhere around 1800 or 1796 or so. Also, a number of vaccine prototypes are developed. It's not that you just hit upon the right bang there. Here's the vaccine and go ahead now. No, there are lots of little changes that are made to keep on seeing which is better, which is safer, which is better, safer, so on, so on. Da, da, da. So when it appears more or less okay that here we have a probable vaccine which is likely to be beneficial, then it goes through animal testing. You try to give them the same way as will happen in humans. So you give the vaccine, you pre-treat them with the vaccine, and then give them the virus and see if they're protected. Now the trouble is that animals are different than humans. So the virus doesn't produce in the animal the same effect as in human. Even when you are pretty sure that the vaccine that is developed up to this stage is safe and effective in preventing the virus induced disease in animal, there is a extent of unsurety here.
So, safety means testing for any potential harmful effects that the vaccine might have on the human body. This constitutes phase 1 of most clinical trials. What happens in phase 2?
So, because you can't infect a person with the infecting organism to test for the effect of the vaccine, you need surrogate marker. What's a surrogate marker? That's the antibody. So, if there is an antibody which acts against that virus, then that could indicate, yeah, likely that this particular vaccine will be effective. So, you give the vaccine and then you test if the participant has developed the antibodies or not. Correct? So that gives you an idea of some sort of an idea that the vaccine is likely to be effective. Okay. So that is what is called as phase 2.
Dr. Sheersagar spoke about the importance of identification of surrogate markers in modern clinical research. The earliest reference to surrogate markers, that is, antibodies, goes back to late 1890 to the works of Emil von Behring and Dr. Kitasato in treating diphtheria in animals. Clearly, we are all very indebted to the scientific developments of the past. Coming to the present, in phase 2 of the clinical trial, antibodies help researchers understand the preliminary indications of the efficacy of the vaccine. Dr. Sheersagar explains how a more robust understanding of efficacy is established in phase 3.
And what is phase 3 in vaccine? That's something a big challenge. Okay. Because here we are really trying to see that when you vaccinate a person, he doesn't develop the infection or disease. Now, for able to test that, we have to have a natural infection going around, correct? As is happening with COVID. So, this is the phase 3. That is, you give to a large number of people the vaccine and to a large number of people the placebo. and then you follow them up for 2 months, 3 months, and see whether they get the infection or not. Now you can imagine that's a very complex process. If I look at the data from, let's say, Mumbai in the month of July, August, we could see that maybe there were about 500 people per lakh population who were getting infected. So if I have to take this Mumbai example forward, let's say we had at that time 5 people out of 1,000 were getting it, and say 50 out of 10,000 were getting it. Okay, 50 out of 10,000. So if the placebo people had 50 patient subjects out of 10,000 getting the infection, and your vaccine group, in that group 5 get it, then that's a 90% reduction in the infection rate. Yeah. So that's the 90% efficacy. Okay. Lot of science goes into developing these vaccines. Lot of science.
Right.
Unimaginable amount of science and experience goes in trying to make it as safe as possible.
If the science around safety and efficacy is the precious lemon that must be steered safely through the race to produce a vaccine, the regulatory framework is the spoon on which it relies. This spoon must be sturdy and inspire confidence. The history of regulation of vaccines and of clinical trials is not pretty. Formal regulation of vaccines began as a response to a tragedy associated with vaccines in the US in 1901, wherein 13 children died due to receiving contaminated antitoxin. The first modern regulation pertaining to clinical trials, the Nuremberg Code, was triggered as a response to inhuman human experimentation in Nazi Germany. In this context, the Indian regulatory framework may have got off onto a shaky start. Dr. Dhwani Mehta explains why this may have happened, delving into the history of colonial laws.
Clinical trials in India are governed by secondary legislation in the form of the New Drugs and Clinical Trials Rules 2019, rather than by primary legislation. So it might surprise people to know this, but the parent act, which is the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940, under which these 2019 rules were enacted, doesn't mention the term clinical trials anywhere at all. Now, this is not surprising. The act was passed in colonial India just as World War II had got underway. And the global impetus for ethical guidelines for clinical research came ultimately from the uncovering of barbaric experiments on humans that were carried out by Nazi doctors who were pursuing racial hygiene. Now, India's parent drug legislation was enacted before all this. Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't or shouldn't have been updated since then, but it partially explains why we don't see any mention of as important an issue as clinical trials anywhere in the actual act. So it wasn't until 1988 that Part 10A was added to the Drugs and Cosmetics Rules 1945 to introduce a whole chapter related to the import and manufacture of new drugs for clinical trials or marketing. So until 2019, it was this Part 10A, which along with Schedule Y, made up the regulatory framework on clinical trials in India. And it stayed in force until the 2019 rules that I mentioned earlier.
India seems to have taken a while to get out of the starting blocks as far as regulations around clinical trials are concerned. Dhwani goes on to explain what lies at the heart of these regulations. Apart from the science, what is the legal obligation that requires clinical trials to be conducted? What steps must be taken before conducting such trials?
So there is a provision in the regulatory framework that states that no new drug may be imported or manufactured except in accordance with the provisions of the Drugs and Cosmetics Act and the 2019 rules. And this, in turn, means that any application for the import or manufacture of a new drug must typically be accompanied by data that's generated during clinical trials. So, the kind of data that must be generated and whether the clinical trial should be local, that means conducted in India or not, depends on the nature of that new drug. So this is the crux of the obligation. And then the 2019 rules lay down that clinical trials cannot be conducted without two kinds of approvals. So one, you need permission from the Central Licensing Authority, which again, as I said, is the Drugs Controller General of India. And then the clinical trial protocol itself must have been approved by an ethics committee that is registered in accordance with these rules. Then the rules provide a lot of detail about the general principles that must be observed in the conduct of clinical trials.
In India, regulatory processes are not synonymous with speed. Do the rules of the race change during a public health emergency like the current pandemic? Dhwani explains the process of accelerated approval for new drugs in such situations.
Right. So ordinarily, vaccines and drugs, or I mean, all new drugs are to be approved only after having submitted, clinical data from different phases of clinical trials. And again, the requirements for this are all detailed in the 2019 rules. Quite often, when the drug is discovered in India, or a molecule is developed in India, um, this the requirement is also that local clinical trials must be conducted in India, and data from that must be submitted to the licensing authority to allow for approval. The question you've asked is interesting because the clinical trial rules themselves are concerned primarily with the information that's required to be submitted in order to gain approval, and not necessarily with the conditions of accelerated approval itself. So just to give you to simplify this and to tell you what I mean by this, is that the 2019 rules do provide for instances in which data may be omitted or abbreviated or deferred. So in such instances, approval may be granted on the basis of less rigorous data than would otherwise have been the case. And confusingly, the 2019 rules provide for this in a variety of different scenarios. So, but for accelerated approval, the rules essentially state that it can be allowed for a new drug for a disease, taking into account the severity, rarity, or prevalence of the disease, as well as the availability of adequate alternative treatments. However, there are some conditions attached to this, so it can be you can provide this kind of accelerated approval only when there is a prima facie case that's made out that the product for which you are seeking approval is likely to be of meaningful therapeutic benefit over existing treatment. Now, what does this mean? So, if you look at the provision in the new drugs and clinical trials rules, this essentially requires that the drug in question must demonstrate remarkable efficacy with a defined dose in the second phase of the clinical trial for the drug. In such cases, the Central Licensing Authority, which otherwise usually waits for phase 3 data before it grants approval, may grant approval even on the basis of phase 2 clinical trial data.
So, the Indian regulatory framework does allow for an accelerated approval process that can provide much needed speed in the race. However, rather than accelerated approval, the phrase that we heard most frequently in the context of the approval of Covishield and Covaxin was restricted emergency use. We asked Dhwani what this phrase meant and why there was confusion surrounding it.
Now, we know from the orders passed by the Drug Controller General of India, as well as the minutes of the subject expert committees that approved these two vaccines, Covishield and Covaxin, that what has been approved is restricted emergency use, and for Covishield, and for Covaxin, restricted emergency use as an abundant precaution in the public interest in clinical trial mode. Now, again, none of these terms are defined anywhere in the regulatory framework. So, one would imagine that restricted emergency use would be defined by specific reference to, either the number of doses that are made available, or the target populations that they are supposed to be made available to, or or other conditions that are attached to the use of these vaccines. But there are no details as far as I can make out in the approvals granted to these two vaccines as far as any of these conditions is concerned. And just to, for example, contrast this with, say, authorization that was granted to, uh, the Pfizer vaccine under by the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. The UK MHRA says that temporary authorization permits the supply of identified batches of this vaccine. So they have in mind a specific quantity of the product that is supposed to be made available, and they also very specifically state that the authorization is not a marketing authorization. Now, again, there's very little clarity on this in the Indian context, as in, because the Indian framework essentially allows approval of a vaccine or a new drug or whatever it is, either for import or for manufacturing or for, compassionate use for individual cases. Now, it's clear that it's not this in the context of Covishield and vaccine. We know that it's not compassionate use. It's not being provided to a very small number of individuals. In fact, now it's being rolled out all across the country. I mean, the status of the authorization that has been given to Covishield and Covaxin is likely to change in light of the announcements that the government has made about allowing a widespread rollout, because none of these, none of this, I mean, this kind of rollout doesn't seem compatible at all with restricted emergency use.
Just as the term restricted emergency use created confusion, so did the use of the phrase clinical trial mode. As the approval was granted for the use of Covaxin only in clinical trial mode, this phrase appears to change the rules of the race altogether because it's never been used before in the context of a vaccine. How should it be understood by people who are being administered the vaccine in clinical trial mode?
I was part of, the ICMR ethics committee that was required to try and understand what clinical trial mode means and how it should be incorporated in the rollout. And of course, we tried to interpret it in a way that allows for most safeguards that exist during ordinary clinical trials to be applied even to the rollout of Covaxin, with, I think, the most important safeguard being the fact that potential recipients or beneficiaries of the vaccine are informed about its regulatory status, about the risks associated with it, and are essentially administered informed consent in the same way as they would be in a clinical trial. It's something that we've developed by applying existing principles, not because a provision like this already exists in the regulatory framework.
It seems then that the regulatory framework surrounding the approval of vaccines may be lacking the desirable sturdiness for such a precarious lemon and spoon race. Without a fitting spoon, it becomes even more important that the lemon is just right. Science has to work doubly harder to reassure people about the safety and efficacy of vaccines. We asked Dr. Sagar how scientists respond to such public anxiety.
I think what I would like to say is that um, that last 2 centuries, the importance of immunization has shown that this is one of the uh, very good way of preventing infectious diseases. There have been situation where because of wrong information going around, people have not taken vaccines, not immunized their children, and they've ended up in having measles and such infection, although these are completely preventable diseases. So people should ask questions, should ask for information, but they should take vaccines. They must take the immunization. A lot of precaution get taken. They must be alert on things, definitely, no doubt. But to say that, oh, I don't trust vaccine, so I won't take it, or I'm anyway immune, I won't take it. So people should understand. It's not easy to understand all the science, but when we have experts guiding the government, I think we have good reason to think that the guidance they are giving is appropriate.
One can have the perfect lemon by picking the best experts and trusting them. But what do we need to make a better spoon? As a lawyer working on health law and policy, we asked Dhwani what changes she thought were needed in the Indian regulatory framework to prepare better for the next public health emergency.
I'll begin with my one pet peeve, which is I've always maintained that clinical trial regulation in India deserves a primary statute that sets out certain key rights and obligations for participants as well as sponsors and investigators. So we do have a comprehensive code now in the form of the 2019 rules, but none of this is linked to a solid provision in the parent statute. So, one consequence of this is that the penalties for violating the provisions of the Clinical Trials Rules 2019 are minimal. And in fact, it's not linked to a specific offense under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act either. And this allows for a lax sort of regulatory atmosphere. So when we were drafting these regulations, we didn't specifically think about how we would want to regulate products like this during the time of an epidemic or a pandemic or other public health emergency. And as we're seeing with COVID-19 now, there are all kinds of issues that do crop up, as in to what extent can you waive regulatory requirements, to what extent should you provide post trial access, what are the other suspensions in your normal regulatory processes that might be required. And we haven't applied our mind to this, and therefore now we're sort of making things up on the fly as we go along, and that's created a lot of uncertainty and confusion. So to prepare for the next pandemic, it might be useful to think about how these regulatory requirements can be appropriately modified in the context of a public health emergency like this one.
As the existing regulatory framework has been found inadequate in coping with challenges posed by the current pandemic, it becomes all the more important for regulatory bodies to be transparent in order to inspire public confidence. While the Drug Controller General of India never explained what clinical trial mode means, as Dhwani explained earlier, Covaxin's approval has now been amended from clinical trial mode to restricted use in emergency situations in public interest. It says that vaccine recipients are now not required to read the fact sheet, sign the consent forms, and submit adverse events reports like earlier. This makes us wonder if these were the conditions for clinical trial mode, they should have been explained earlier. We are getting some clarity on it only now when it no longer exists. In some sense, the controversy around regulatory approvals of vaccines has highlighted the opacity and transparency with which regulatory bodies can function and makes us think of ways in which that can be addressed. After all, races don't happen in silos. At the heart of any race is the question of ethics, transparency, and accountability. This brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm extremely excited to share that we are going to have Dr. Anant Bhan, an eminent bioethicist, on the next episode of Healthy Dose, which will be hosted by my co-host Yogni Oak. They will be discussing the ethical issues centered around vaccination and the pandemic in general. Do tune in. We are on SoundCloud and Spotify as Vidhi Center for Legal Policies podcast. You can also listen to us on Google Podcast or iTunes.